Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Teacher Ryan, and today we'll be talking about the self, society, and culture. This is now our second series in our discussion on understanding the self. Anyway, if you're new here in my channel, don't forget to click and subscribe and hit the notification down below for more updates of my videos. So, long before philosophers tried to give us the perspectives how we understand ourselves. And one of those things is to understand ourselves is to understand that kind of body that we have and that kind of soul that we have that animates us. So here there will be a shift of the paradigm. It's not totally a shift, but there's a transition from body and soul to body and mind, because sociologists now took a parang opportunity to really consider that it's not just about the soul that we carry, but it's all about our mind, that how we project ourselves. So here in this afternoon, we'll be looking at the importance of the relationship between the self and the external reality. So, what is the relationship between external reality and the self? Is there really a significant relationship when our self is exposed to our environment? Or is there really a significant relationship that will affect the self in terms of the external reality or vice versa? So, is it the self that affects the external reality, or is it really the external reality that will affect ourselves? Now let's look at the story of Tarzan. A little boy named Tarzan was left in the middle of the forest. He never had an interaction with any other human beings but apes and animals. His sole interaction with them made him like one of them. Now, as you can see, Tarzan, as a human person, was exposed to an environment where he behaved like an animals. He lived like an animals. He ate like an animals. But if you can see that his human body is different from the other animals, but that kind of behavior, that pattern from his mind was basically aligned to how animals live. So now, disappointedly, human person will not develop like human person without intervention. This is really true. You cannot be that kind of person that you are influ- without being influenced by your environment. If you are living in a family wherein most of them are loud people, for example, or even a sociable people, so you tend to create that kind of adaptation to really that will really align that kind of intervention within your family. However, that is not always true, because there are family who are so sociable, but the opposite kind of behavior that child has is different. After all, ourselves are not special because of the soul infused into us. So there's nothing about special about the soul, no? It's natural. It's in us. No? We may be gifted with intellect and capacity to rationalize things. Our growth and development ourselves are truly products of interaction with external reality. So that kind of behavior that we have right now is the result how we influence ourselves to the environment. So ourself is regulated no to the kind of norms that we are into. So our growth is basically that refers to the, the demonstration how we see ourselves from one stage to another, and development is referring to the kind of behavioral pattern that we adapt from one another. Now, I want you to look back. How would yourself look like when you were still in elementary, or even in high school, or even now in college? Here, as you can see, when you were still elementary, that kind of behavior that you expose is you are more on the playfulness, or this is more on exploratory experience where you find that you found parang that kind of behavior that you try to deal with. For example, you were more on playing. This is how you actually build yourself. This is a preparation. That's why if you see children playing with toys, they tend to create the uh, they tend to create a kind of script or that kind of dialogue that they have with their toys. So one toy is talking to another toy. So this is a kind of contemplation of the reality that they are now immersing themselves, so that later on as they grow up, so they have now the preparedness, that kind of building their communication one another. So in elementary, as you can see, you have the stage of being playful. So you were a risk takers, no, you are not afraid to do mistakes as long as you find it enjoyable. Moreover, when you go to in high school, this is the time that more curiosities, more things that you would like to explore, and you're now becoming more risk takers. So this time that you are not anymore having that kind of playfulness in the playground, for example. Now, when you are now in high school, as you can see, so this is more on the building connection with another. That's why we have the barkada system. So you're helping one another in high school as well, that you are now discovering what's really what you want to happen in your life, or what the things that you don't like to happen in your life. But that is not always true, because in this stage, this is now the time that you are trying to find yourself and find to what you really want in life, what the things that you want to happen in life. So this is this is the stage wherein you are not sure what you want in life as well. But the moment you reach college, so basically this is a time that the time of reflection, that the preparedness for you to see the reality of life. So here in this stage, you can find true friends, and your friends are now becoming few because you don't see the value of having bigger circle. But that's okay, having a big circle. But in this stage, you prefer to be with few of your friends who can listen to your problems, or even would like to share your problems with them. No, so see, as you can see, there's a difference. No, there's a difference between how you see yourself in elementary and even in high school and even in college. So we behave according to our stages. When you were in elementary, you behave like kids who love to play. You're so curious and you internalize yourself through example playing and how you interact with children. And when you reach in high school, so basically as you can see, you are now building friendship, connecting influences, your social network is increasing. By the time that you reach in college, as you can see, there are many things that you want to consider, but there are only few that you would like to share. All right. Now, here in this subject matter, where do I belong? So this is now the question where we'll be looking forward to discussing something about how do I see myself in the lens of the society and culture. According to Stevens' 1996, he defined the self as separate, self-contained, independent, consistent, unitary, and private. Let's discuss this one by one. Accordingly, the self is distinct from other selves. It is always unique and has its own identity. One cannot be another person, even twins. To understand ourselves is to understand that ourself is unique, separate from one another. So there is no reason for you to compare yourselves to other people, because you have that kind of potential, that kind of uniqueness, that kind of characteristic that nobody can except you. So if there are times in your life that you tend to measure your potential like with other people, so you fail to understand about yourself. You need to reflect that you have your own season, you have your own way how to achieve things in life. Though people may have in advance having that kind of materials or maybe that kind of experience that they have, but one thing and for sure, you may not be yet there, but one thing and for sure, slowly in progress is still a progress. So even twins here, know though they grew up the same or similar characteristics by their physical body, but the kind of behaviors that they are exposed to environment may also vary. So therefore, yourself is separated or separate. Now, second, that is a second, self as self-contained and independent. Its distinctiveness allows to be self-contained with its own thought, characteristics, and volition. When you talk about volition, it talks about decision making, how you decide. No? It does not require any other self for it to exist. So here, to understand yourself is to understand that yourself is contained with kind of characteristics, that kind of thoughts, that kind of volitions, and you are independent. Even if it's okay to ask for support from other people, but at the end of the day, you have also to decide what the things that you really want to happen. So our self is self-contained and independent because nobody can actually think about that for you. People will suggest, people will just give recommendation, but at the end of the day, it is still your decision that will matter. So here you have your own decision in life, so you have to maintain that. You have to think about it because it's not about them. It's all about how you decide what you really want in life. Second is we have self as consistent. It has a personality that is enduring and therefore can be expected to persist for quite some time. Its consistency allows to be studied, described, and measured. Consistency also means that the particular self traits, characteristics, tendencies, potentials are more or less the same. Now here, even if we look at in the reality that we are not consistent in the ways that we are doing, but if you deepen the reflection on the understanding the self is actually consistent. Consistent in a way that we have that kind of personality that is enduring. If you look at psychology, it's one of the old schools of understanding the personality. We have four kinds types of personality. We have the introvert and the extrovert. The introvert has two, and the introvert or extrovert has two, so a total of four. Let's discuss first the first personality of the extrovert. We have the so-called the choleric. Choleric. So the choleric, its motto, no, it's let's do it my own way. They are more firm. They have the kind of leadership. They are easily irritated sometimes, and they try to regulate their decision on their own. And one of them in the professions that we have is actually being a lawyer or being a boss or being a kind of administrators or even so basically choleric has the leader type. He can actually handle situations, pressures, because he has the kind of intuitions to really control. So if you are the choleric kind of person who loves to ask errands, so you are choleric. Next, we have the extrovert. We have the so-called the sanguine. The sanguine people, their motto is "Let's do it in a fun way." So these people basically like to have fun. They love to make jokes. They are inspiring, motivating. They have a lot of things to say. And most of them are talented, no, in terms of singing, acting, and even in dancing. So it's really their energy that they keep on rooting. No, they keep on seeing themselves as a potential uh, personality because they can actually adapt the environment. Okay, next, let's go to the introverts. No, the introverts can either be a melancholy and even the phlegmatic. The melancholy people, their saying is let's do it in the right way. So one of their fears is failure. When people ask favor to the melancholy and they won't accept it, they will do it 150% effort. So they are afraid to fail. They tend to worry, they tend to become perfectionists. So melancholy people are self-image conscious. So basically they love to joke, but when they are joked back, so they don't like it. Even if silently, um, they are hurt, no? So basically they are very comfortable when they are talking, and they are very conscious when they are speaking. So that's the melancholy. Lastly, we have the phlegmatic. The phlegmatic people are not very obvious on their self-expression, so it's emotionless, and then they tend to be quiet most of the time, and they have the kind of trait that when you ask errand to them, so basically they will just do it one way. So when you ask them to wash dishes, so they will just wash dishes and they will not do anything because that's your instruction. And most of the phlegmatic people, they don't actually do an extra mile. If necessary, they can, but by nature, they are not really doing an extra mile. So phlegmatic people, their motto is let's do it in the relaxed way. And phlegmatic people are afraid to have conflict. So one thing that they don't like is conflict. So they tend to become peacemakers. Now, so what is it for me when we know about these characteristics of the personality? This is also to understand that not all people will have the same personality that we have. For example, for choleric, they tend to become frank and tactless, and they don't care about how you feel, but as long as I can say it. And it is not also parang compatible when choleric is exposed to melancholy people, because melancholy people, they tend to become emotional when they receive that kind of offense. Then sometimes they are not always compatible. Here we can see choleric and sanguine are compatible because both of them are speakers, and sometimes the one would actually lose is a sanguine, no? And they tend to become hurtful when choleric tend to become frank. And then for melancholy and for sanguine, they are compatible because melancholy tend to be entertained by sanguine's friendly and positive vibes. And phlegmatic choleric, they are actually compatible because choleric, as a frank, direct, outspoken person, tend to have a understanding to phlegmatic because phlegmatic tend to become very patient. Now, so, so if you happen to know these personalities, no, you learn how to adapt the situation. So if you are with the choleric, so you don't really, you really have to be flexible on your personality. All right. So here next we have okay. So next, where are we? Okay, the self as unitary. It is the center of all the experiences and thoughts that run through a certain person. It is like the chief commander or the chief command post in an individual where all processes, emotions, and thoughts converge. So here, as we can see that we understand ourselves as self as unitary. Our emotions, our thoughts, how we decide things should always balance, should be balanced in the way so that there will be no conflict. So here, in order for us to have a smooth understanding in the management that we have, so basically there must be a unity in terms of our thoughts, emotions, and our processes. Because if they will not jive together, so basically there will be chaos in or you have a hard time to think about what you really want to happen. Next, the self as private. Each person sorts out information, feelings and emotions and thoughts processes within the self. This whole process is never necessitate or never accessible to anyone but the self. The self is isolated from the external world. It lives within its own world. There is no potential clash. There is a potential clash between the self and the external world. Now see what the point of Stevens here is. We can say that ourself is separate, no, ourself is isolated from the external world. So before the self will be exposed to the external world, we are actually private by nature. So there are things that need to be kept unsaid, so that we actually avoid conflict, or even if we do it, no, we can actually have in constant struggle with what we are doing right now. So our self has the tendency to sort out information and feelings and emotions. That's why when you if there is a unity in our emotions, our thoughts, and our the information that we see here, then we can actually a good command of organizing the things. So basically, if information will actually, of course, information will go on the feelings and our emotions and how we process the things. So we can actually understand that not most of the time we need with the people around. Sometimes we need to reflect on our own. So here, as private self that we have, now we cannot share everything that we know, because sometimes to it's better to keep it known by ourselves and try to process it, so what is beneficial and not. Okay, next, the self as private. For the self, what it might be, what it can be, and what will it be. So here we can actually see that our self is in constant level of deciding things, the what the self wants in the external world, like what it might be. So you tend to worry sometimes what it can be, so how it looks like, and what will it be. So what it will be, so basically you're looking at the certainty of the future. The self is always at the mercy of external circumstances that bump and collide in it. So, when we are exposed to a situation when we need to decide what we want, so the self reflects itself to the things that will matter and will not matter. So, whether you like it or not, problems are part of our external reality. So, it depends upon the self how we can actually manage it. So, so you tend to worry sometimes when you decide without the support of the people or prayer from other people. So here yourself is always at the mercy of external circumstances. So you have no choice, but you have to face the reality, especially when you make decision in life. So make it sure that when you decide, there is always a corresponding consequences. So in that consequences that we have, we don't need to run away from it, because the more you run away from problem, the more the problem becomes even bigger. So you really have to face it with courage and conviction. And then the moment you face your problem with conviction and courage, so basically that will actually calm down the problems. So you really have to reflect to God, so to give you that kind of wisdom to really face the problems with resiliency in your heart. It is ever changing and dynamic, allowing external influences to take part in its shaping. So basically, how we expose ourselves into the external reality, we are actually shaping ourselves to be flexible. So flexible in a way that we cannot be changing. There will be a need to change because we cannot really stick to the things that we want in our life. So there's no permanent thing in this world except change. So in this situation that we are in the pandemic, no, so we need to see ourselves to really parang feed ourselves so that we can survive. But if you keep on thinking that you cannot change, so basically you need support system from your friends, family, and those who are good influencers. Okay, the vibrant relationship of self and external reality. So it's not always bad, no, to face the external reality, but there's a good effect how we actually expose ourselves to the reality. This perspective is known as the social constructionist perspective. They argue for a merged view of the person and their social context. Their boundaries of one cannot easily be separated from the boundaries of others. All right, here as you can see, we have this what we call the social constructionist perspective. Whatever we thought that we constructed from our mind is what we call the social construct. Now, a social construct is an idea that we project to the external reality. For example, if you fail the board exam, you tend to create that kind of idea that you might be a failure, or maybe you can give yourself another chance. So you construct that kind of idea. For example, the word temptation is actually a social construct. It's not really part of the happenings in the reality, but this is how you project that perspective about temptation. But what makes it bad about temptation when you are tempted if there's already a action? So here, there's really a merged view. So a merged view of the person and the social context. We behave depending on the situation that we are in. So when you're in the church, as you can see, so yourself adjust, no, in way that we can actually see the conformity of the conventions of the rules of the church. And also when you go to school, so yourself adjust in the situation in the uniformity of the rules and regulations and behaviors that you are expected to do, and the boundaries of one cannot easily be separated from the boundary of others. So we are always in the boundary. In life, we have the so-called the two lanes. So one lane is what we call the boundary, going home, and the boundary going back. So going forward and the boundary moving backward. So here, as you can see, that ourself is just is like a driver, that we are free to drive our own boundary, but you have to know that when you go beyond your boundary, you should know your limitation. So basically, we can actually do whatever that we want in our life as long as we will not stoop down other people. So here, as you can see, that we can see that there's really a relationship between the boundary that you have and the boundary of other people. But the moment you go to the boundary of other people, that's a time that limitations will actually restrict you to do it. Next, we have the social constructivist argument. The self should not be seen as static entity. Entity means that parang something like parang just like a internet connection. For example, when there is a weak connection, so there is a, for example, if you look the Wi-Fi signal, so it lowers down and lowers up. So it's not, the self is not about it. It is just how we respond it because of the situation. But actually, if you look at it, ourselves is actually a full signal Wi-Fi. So basically, how we react to it, it's not about lowering down the signal or increasing the signal, but it's not static. It's full full Wi-Fi signal, for example. So that stays constant through and through. Rather, the self is seen as something that is unceasing flux. So there is, for example, like a river that it continues to flow endlessly. In constant struggle with external reality, and it's malleable. Malleable is able to adjust in dealings with the society. The self is always in participation with the social life, and its identity is subject to influences here and there. If you happen to see the sign of Manny Pacquiao, who who exposed himself to a parang he exposed his talent to Wish 107.5, and he shared to the world that kind of talent, the hidden talent that he had, then people around gave a negative feedback, negative criticisms against him. So they said that there are a lot of potential rappers, deserving potential rappers rather than him. It's not his fault that he was born he was born rich because of the sacrifices of his father, but he just want to share what kind of talent that he has, regardless of whether they will be jealous or maybe they will be envious about his talent, as long as this is the self that I want you to know about it. So I think this is the right time for us to eradicate that kind of stigma, that kind of stereotype. Now, regardless of your economic status of your life, for example, whether you're rich or poor, you're black or white, so there must be an equality of sharing our talent to the world. So if you don't like it, basically you are not the right audience for it. If you love that kind of talent, therefore you are the right audience for that. Okay? The next we have the self is truly multifaceted. So basically that our self is we can actually adapt one particular social context. We can actually adapt ourselves, how we actually look ourselves in the family, how we see ourselves in the church and even in school. So basically, we have many ways how we adjust ourselves depending on the situation. A boy named John, if you see that he's actually a math professor in Catholic University for more than a decade now. He has been beautiful. He has beautiful wife, Joanne, who was John's college girlfriend and his first and the last. John has two doting kids, a son and a daughter. John serves as a lector on the commentator in the church. Now, if you can see here, the different roles of John in himself in the family, himself in the as a husband, as himself for his children as a father, and himself as a parang believer of his faith. So as a man of different roles, one cannot expect John to change and adjust his behavior. So can expect John to change his behavior and even the language depending on his social situation. When John is in a university, so basically he behaves like a professor, and a husband can be intimate and touchy. Joan finds him sweet, something that his students will never conceive him to be. Something like, oh, you John, so you're a teacher, so basically it's not obvious that you are a intimate and touchy. It's different from the way how you treat your wife to your students. So basically there's really a distinction on your role for your wife and your role as a teacher. His kids fear him as father. John can be stern, no strict. His churchmates knew him as calm, all smiles guy ready to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. So basically, so we cannot just be looking at ourselves just as the self itself, but we can see that our self has different roles to adapt depending on the social context, as we can see there on the PowerPoint. Having different roles is normal. So that's normal, acceptable, and expected. Whether you like it or not, whether where your feet will actually lead you to. So you can actually, that's normal. You're exposed to that kind of situation, and it's acceptable because you know how to adapt, and it's expected that you have that kind of behavior that will actually jive to the situation. The self is capable of morphing, changing, and fitting itself into any circumstances it finds itself in. Okay? But it's not always like, for example, if you're exposed to the environment of drug dealers and you become drug dealers. No, you have that kind of conviction in your mind that you know exactly what is right and from wrong. Okay? Now let's look at the self and culture. So how we see ourselves as part of the culture and how our culture shapes the kind of self that we have. So we have the French anthropologist. Anthropologist is a social scientist where they study human behavior throughout time. So remaining the same person and turning chameleon by adapting to one's context seems paradoxical. To most, every self has two faces. We have the person and the moi. The moi refers to a person's sense of who he is, his body, and his basic identity. The person is composed of the social concepts of what it means to be who he is. For example, you were born in a Muslim community. Your moi will actually shape you to the culture of Islam. So you adapt that kind of religion, that kind of language, that kind of environment because you are exposed to that, and that is your moi because that's how you are shaped by your culture. But at the end of the day, you are not always about religion, about your language. You are human, having that kind of body, that kind of identity as a person, as part of the human race. That's why we are separated by our human races according to our culture, according to our language. But if you come to think about it, that we are just one humanity. So there's no reason for us to discriminate one another, and there's no reason for us to say that you are better than the others, because no one is born here to overpower or to become better than the others. Because if you see that yourself as a person who is capable enough than the others, so basically there's something wrong about how you identify yourself. So we are just equal in footing. You were born to be humans, and you have to act like humans. So basically we know exactly our limitations. So if you don't need to see yourself that you're better than the others, because if you see that way, so you just let other people let see themselves less. All right? So person has much to do with what it means to live in a particular situation, a particular religion, a particular family, a particular nationality, and how to behave given the expectations and influences from others. So here, if you see, the person is how you should behave, how you are should supposed to do these things, because this is what it is expected from you. So if you come to think about like how Filipinos, the OFW, behave abroad. So if you see that how Filipinos behave abroad is according to their moy, but how they see themselves as humans, as a person of dignity. So basically, that's their their moy. So here, previously, how will you identify the person and the moy of John from the previous story? So when he is in school, he's a math teacher. That is his the person, because that kind of expected behavior that he needs to project towards his students. And when he is in the church, so it is expected for him to align his behavior to the faith believers. But the moment he arrives at home, he is a father to his children, and of course that is still his person. But when he comes to think about it, he is a person who has the responsibility to respond the needs of his family, so that becomes his moy. Okay? So here again, how do we see the behavior of the Filipinos here and abroad? So cross-culturally, so if we would, if we would actually compare how uh, one culture affecting other culture. In the Philippines, many people violate jaywalking rules where a common Filipino treats the road, even national ones, as his, and he is just simply crosses whenever and wherever. When Filipino visits other country with strict traffic rules like the Singapore, you will notice how suddenly law-abiding the said Filipino becomes. So here, this is a reality that not all, but sometimes there are Filipinos who are violators in terms of rules, because we are comfortable where we are in. This is actually our moy. But the moment we are exposed now to another territory, another culture, so we adjust ourselves to behave in order not to violate or to face consequences. And that is what we call our person. The self simply morph according to the circumstances and context. So, Filipinos tend to consider their territory as part of who they are. Tapat mo, linis mo. Okay? So when you do something like if you use the plate, so you're expected to wash your own plate, no? Filipinos most probably do not consider national roads as something external to who they are. It is part of them and they are part of it. So if it is part of you and they are part of it, so basically that's your moy. But if it is not part of you and you have to do it because you have no choice, so basically that is your person. So the self simply morph according to the circumstances and context. However, when he is in a foreign territory where nothing technically belongs to him, he has to follow rules or else be apprehended. So another aspect of the social constructivism is what we call the language, no? For example, we have the word mahal kita and we have the word I love you in English. The Filipino brand of this articulation of love, unlike English, does not specify the subject and the object of love, who loves and who is loved. In Filipino language, there is no distinction between the lover and the beloved. They are one. So when you say mahal kita, so there's no distinction of who said and who receives that kind of love. So it is just the same. But in English, it's very specific. So who is the one who said it? So there's what we call the I, and the one who receives the love, it's the you. But here in mahal kita, so the word kita is just the you, and the mahal it's just the verb, and you cannot really identify unless you see that person saying mahal kita. You can identify that person loves that person, but if it is in written text, we don't know exactly what does mahal is referring, or what does that love refer to. Okay. And then in Filipino, mahal can mean both love and expensive. So remember that word is arbitrary. So the word is not dependent. The word is not dependent on its own meaning. So one word may mean different things. For example, the word love in Filipino can be both love and one is expensive. Love is intimately bound with value, with being expressive and being precious. Something expensive is valuable. So you cannot really consider something that's cheap. So when something is cheap, so basically it does not most likely have a value. Someone we love is valuable to us. So we associate expensive as value towards love. No? The Sanskrit origin, you say Sanskrit, that is one of the earliest languages in the world. So where love is love, no, with the H, which means desire. Technically, love is a desire. Another interesting of our language is its being gender neutral. In English, Spanish, and other languages, there is a clear distinction between the third person female pronoun he and she. For Spanish, we have the él and ella, and we both eat siya. So if you say siya, so we do not specify whether he or she, it's neutral. So you say just siya, that's one word. But in English and even Spanish, we don't say siya, but we have to specify that kind of gender. So basically, the language of the Filipinos is gender neutral. So we don't actually say na when you say the pronoun siya, so we can either mean male or female. Okay, ikaw, no? But for other language like English, so we say he or she, him or her. Next, we have the self and the development of the social world. Okay, now let's see how ourself and we see how the social world will actually develop that kind of perspective that we can have in ourselves. So, how do people actively produce their social worlds? So, how do we create that kind of social world that we have? And basically, the kind of social world that we develop is in the form of language. So, language as both a publicly shared and privately utilized symbol system is the site where individual and the social make and remake each other. So, we create a social world through the use of language. So we cannot really connect with other people without the use of the kind of language that we have one another. So our language is essential for us to have connection and interaction with other people. It can either be publicly shared or privately utilized. So this is actually how we see the importance of the social world through language. Human persons develop with the use of language acquisition and interaction with others. The way we process information is normally form of an internal dialogue in our head. We have this so cognitive and emotional development of a child is always mimicry of how it is done the social world in the external reality where he is. So in other words, how we actually use language depends on how we actually expose ourselves to the environment. So we have the so-called the language acquisition. So when you talk about language acquisition, it is unconsciously that you are absorbing the kind of pattern of language that your society has. So you don't think much about it. You just need to you just adapt it naturally. So when you adapt it naturally, you can actually use that in order to interact with other people. So when you look at children, they don't have that kind of explicit instruction when to use the proper spelling or not, the correct grammar or not. It is just the natural adaptation that they acquire from their environment based on their observation. And this will serve as like when before we interact, we actually construct it in our mind how to say it as we grow and we go to school. So we are having this kind of what they call language learning. So the language learning is now you are conscious on how you are actually you will be going to say it. No? So this is both cognitive, that the way how we use our mind, and the use how our emotion. That's why if you love to learn a language, no, there must be an essence of desire. Your emotion is attached to it, no, and of course you can actually process it properly with the use of your mind. So our mind and our emotion should go together, because no matter how powerful or maybe influential the language is, but if does not give a positive um, impression to you, you will never learn the language. It's not just because you don't like it, but because you are parang there is really an impression about that language. For example, if you see that language is more about war and the kind of economic indications that they have, so you don't find it parang useful. You'll be looking at the language as you are learning so far as something that is useful in your communication, in your business, and in your connection. All right, so we have here another sociologist, Mead and Vygotsky. Human mind is made, constituted through the language experience in the external world and as encounter in dialogues with others. So human mind indeed is made. You know, say made is molded. So it is not just because invented, but this is actually molded by instruction. This is how people teach us the proper structure, the proper pronunciation, the proper usage, when to use a particular word or not, whether this is appropriate or not. So we are molded through regulating what is correct or not. That's why our mind is made to be properly used according to the situation. So in our mind, we have the use of the language as part of our experience, and because we are shaped by our external reality, is how we use our language as an experience, as an encounter with other people through the use of dialogue, no, and talking with them. Next is imagine a child internalizing his dialogue script while he is playing. So if you can see that the child can easily adapt a language when the child is exposed to. If you look at children exposed to media, exposed to internet, where they see, the cartoons, for example, what they call this one, the Peppa Pig, no, in British, no, that kind of accent, that kind of behavior, they can actually adopt it. So the way how Peppa Pig sound like, how Peppa Pig behave like, no, in that kind of situation, the child can actually learn about it, and that's normal because that is how they are preparing themselves in the reality of conversation with among children, I mean. Notice how children can easily adapt way of cartoon characters they are exposed to. So that's a kind. So if you see that children nowadays are trained to speak English and even like sound like British, I was not delivered unto the slow on the feet. So that kind of entertainment that they are exposed to. No, just imagine Dora. Okay? The self in families. And we know that family is one of the greatest influencers how we actually understand the external reality to how we understand ourselves. Sociologists focus on the different institutions and powers play in the society. The impact of the family is still deemed as given in understanding the self. Human beings are born virtually helpless and dependency period of a human baby to its parent for nurturing is relatively longer than most other animals. So sociologists, no one compares to the power, no, the kind of institution in the society than having a family. The family is basically one vessel to understand ourselves. To understand ourselves by looking at our family is how we are we are trained, how we are taught to behave this way. So human beings, no, just like babies, we are we were actually helpless. We are virtually helpless. We don't know exactly what we're doing. That's why babies, no, by nature need help from their parents. And this kind of nurture can be also similar to the other animals, but there is a rationality that the human person as parent, no, can see the condition of the baby by supporting it, by feeding it, giving nurture to it, as the baby will grow up throughout the stages. Learning, therefore, is critical in our capacity to actualize our potential of becoming humans. So, in order for you to understand your potentiality as human, is you have to learn, and learning is one way to develop the kind of identity that you have. You learn something about yourself, you keep on improving, you have to know what your potentials are, what you're capable are. So that is an exposure for you to see that your family will give you that kind of learning as well as the learning that you get from schooling. Becoming a fully realized human, a child enters a system of relationships, most important of which is the family. It is what a family initiates person to become that serves as the basis for this person's progress. That's why we have to be thankful for our family, that kind of behavior that we have right now. We have that kind of manner, that we have that kind of respect, we have that kind of relationship that is worth keeping. That's why most of the children are dependent. They tend to become mama's boy or mama's girl. So basically that is a kind of love or care that the parents can give. But as they grow up, they learn to become independent of their own, because not all the time that your parents will actually be with them as they grow up in life. So they have to decide to really have that kind of independence. But for now, so your family will actually support you in your schooling, so you have to be thankful about it. And if there are things that they ask from you, so basically you need to obey them so that they keep on believing in you, and they will keep on supporting with you. If And I have here a kind of poem that I want you to internalize, that the reason how we behave today is how we are shaped by our childhood days. If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns violence. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. So if you are the person right now, that whatever that you're doing right now is are all are always mistakes. There's nothing good about you. So you feel the condemnation in whatever that you do. Mali na lang jud ang always na ako ginabuhat, because it was deeply rooted to that kind of childhood that you have in the past. You were criticized, you were rejected. What I mean is, you were always parang exposed to a kind of criticism that up to today you see criticism is a kind of condemnation. That's you are tend to become highly sensitive. You are afraid to make mistakes because of the exposure that you have in the past. Next, the child learns how to be hostile. He learns to be he learns violence. That's why people who are criminals, for example, some people criminals because they are exposed when they were children that people around them who, tend to become, for example, like they don't see you as something like is, for example, you are just part of it, but they don't see you but that kind of provider, that kind of, for example, that you are seeing you that kind of a person that you can actually help them. No, they are hostile. So whatever that you do, they keep on scolding you. They keep on flagellating you. They keep on reprimanding you. That kind of hostility that you expose to the family. So basically, so as you grow up, you learn how to become violent. For example, if you grow up in a family where you are always spanked by your family, your parent, for example, and then even just a single move that becomes a mistake, and then you will be uh, you will be spanked by then, and then until you grow up unconsciously, when you become parent, you will also do that the same how you were treated before. And if a child learns to be shame, if a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. So if you're the kind of person that you always feel guilty on the things that you're doing, so you are actually parang treated to be like in parang everything you make a mistake that's shameful. So don't make mistake because that's shameful. So the moment you feel the shame, that will actually grow, that will actually lead you to feel guilty. Let me continue the reading. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns confidence. Yeah? So that's why when you in the future when you will have your children, encourage them because that will actually give them the confidence. No? If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child, for example, wow, you are very good, no, as you grow up, you learn how to appreciate things. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns faith. If a child lives with approval, he learns to like himself. If a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to love the world. But if a child lives with prayer, he learns to love God. So see, the kind of person that you have is the product of how you were treated before. And whatever the kind of experiences that you had before in your family, that would lead you the kind of behavior, kind of person that you are today. Unconsciously you are doing it because that is actually rooted in your past. That is according to the poem of Dorothy Law Nolte, the gender and the self. So this is one controversial issue that we have nowadays about how we project ourselves as gender. Is gender something to do with male and female, something like the bigotry, or something like the gender as your choice, whether what kind of preference or orientations that you have, or that kind of gender roles of women and men, that what men can do women can, and what women can't do men can. So this, the gender here that I'm referring to, is most likely an opportunity that we can give to whatever gender preference you have. This will give an equal opportunity for both male and female, and this will also give others the opportunity to project what kind of image that they want for themselves. Gender is one of those lossy of the self that is subject to alteration, change, and development. In the past years, we have seen people fought hard for the right to express, validate, and assert their gender expression. Many conservatives may frown upon this, insist on the biological. It is important point of view of social sciences to find, express, and live his identity. So here, the gender is one of the loci, the locus, or the kind of situation that we can actually alter it, we can actually change it and develop. Okay. Now, there's an argument that what you have biologically, that supposed behavior that you have, when you grow up to be biologically male, so it is expected that your behavior is a male according to your biological, and where you if you are born to be female by by nature, so it is expected that your behavior should be female. But that is not always true most of the time, because our body and our mind, our behavior are actually are actually separate. No, are separate. In other words, your body is neutral and your mind can actually decide. So we are living in a convention that you are born to be male and you have to behave like a male. And when you are born to be a female, then it's expected you are born to be female. But this is a different point of view of social sciences. That having that kind of gender, you have to find it. You have to find it and you know how to express it and live on it as your identity. So whether you're pressured or maybe you're challenged, when you are reminded by the environment that you have in your family, in your institution, but at the end of the day, it is still your decision that will surface. But if you see that your institution, your environment will allow you to help yourself to grow to become better person, why not to follow it? But if you think that this institution will not somehow help you to identify the kind of gender that you have, then you have to decide. Because at the end of the day, what matters then is not about their their comfortability, but what matters here is how you conform to the happiness or the contentment that you have in yourself. Because if you pretend to be who you are not, at the end of the day, you will not become happy. You will not become satisfied. If you enjoy your femininity or your feminine gender, then you consider at it as part of your satisfaction. So be it. But that is a different story when we are looking at the religious perspective, because it is in the scripture that there must be only man and woman. But later on, as we realize that we have this so-called the psychological lens wherein people may have their choices. This forms part of the selfhood that one cannot just dismiss. As a whole, he is taught by taking note of their gender identities. Oftentimes, society forces a particular identity onto us, depending on our sex and our gender. In the Philippines, husbands for most of the part are expected to provide for the family. The eldest man in the family is expected to be the head of the family and hold in it. And we have like we Nancy Shudoro, a feminist, argues on mother's role having tendency to imitate the same and reproduce the same kind of mentality as women as care provider in the family. Okay, so the culture of the Filipino is basically when a husband is expected to provide needs for the family, and that's part of the culture. And the eldest man in the family, so to be the one will actually to be the head and will become the breadwinner. Here we have feminist no Nancy. She argues that the mother's role having the tendency to imitate the same. So daughter is expected to behave or expected to have the same role of the mother. Yes, the reproducing offspring is one of the roles of women biologically. But if you see here, the gender itself is then shaped within a particular context of time and space. The sense of self that is being taught makes sure that an individual fits in a particular environment. Gender has to personally discovered and asserted and not dictated by culture and the society. So, at the end of the day, what matters then is your decision, your choice. Whether the society will tell you to behave this way or to be like that, what matters then is your choice. So, because your choice will lead you that kind of realization that what you want to be or what you want to experience in life. So for men and women, the role there is to give opportunity of every individual to experience the same thing. May not be like biological, like giving birth or carrying mga heavy loads, but give them an equal opportunity. Like for example, um, it should be men will drive and women will just stay at home. So this is the kind of culture that dictates them to be to have that kind of social role that you to the point that you deprive the opportunity with them. So I hope that as we expand, as we explore, as we discover more about the society and the culture and the family and the gender that we have, no? So it's not about the external reality that will affect us. It is ourself that will lead to affect our external reality. Because you know what? You have to think about it. What matters most there is how you explore, it's how you personally discovered and asserted that kind of self that you have. Not based on what the society and the culture dictate you to be, but how you dictate that kind of self that you want to be. And that kind of satisfaction is worth remembering. And I hope that this lesson will lead you to a realization that it's me will actually it's me will face the world. Even if the world turns back, I will still stand. Because I know that at the end of the day, the world will say something bad about me, but I will stand firm because I know that I have the personal connection of myself and a personal communion with God. Because God knows whatever that I do, not for the glory of this world, but the glory of His presence. And this ends our chapter 2 of our discussion on understanding the self, where do I belong, the self, society, and culture. So, don't forget to subscribe this channel and see you in the next episode of my class. Goodbye and God bless.